Tyler. Oh my goodness,
Daniel.
it's good to see you. How are you? How have you been?
I'm good, Daniel. It's good to see you, sir.
Well, first off, I think that it is the idea of the importance of conversations and healing is only going to become more pronounced in its importance as technological singularity and interconnectivity gets more intense,
Yeah.
and things like that. I think honestly, there's just countless people who are hungry and looking for that and don't know that they're looking for that. I mean, so much of what Michelle and I talk about with like philosophize your life is basically meeting the conditions of possibility for the kinds of dialogue and conversations that heal, that structure the
Mm,
psyche and things like that. And the separation of philosophy from voicecraft, the art of speaking, has been a disaster.
mm, mm.
And it just tends to be the case that philosophical subjects are the ones that you can talk about for a really long time. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of healing comes not from learning what you think, but how you think, and
Mm.
learning what how your spouse or friends or mother or parents or friend, other people, how they think. And the only way you learn how a person thinks is an extensive period where the thought can unfold. And the
Yeah.
answer is not known ahead of time. Because if the answer is known ahead of time, then you'll just go straight to that and you're not going to get a clear reading on how a person thinks. And what I mean
Mhm.
by how a person thinks is some people go to abstract knowledge, some go to personal experience, some weave abstract and personal, some are associational thinkers, some are
Do you
going to
have
be
a
more.
model? I don't want to interrupt you, but I think
Please.
you're trying to get onto something that I think is interesting. Like, do you have a general model, like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram?
Mm.
Like, do you have a general model that you sort of, and I know this may be overgeneralizing, but that you sort of fit modes or types of ways of thinking into, or do you follow a specific model, or do you just sort of is it more of a loosely understood, all right, this person understands things and thinks things this way, this person this way? I guess how do you sort of compartmentalize that?
It's a great question. I wouldn't say I have all of our kind of work is not so much of, I want to say, a model as it is based on phenomenology, like experience that you encounter. And also making space is basically making space, like to think in a way that makes space for all possible ways of thinking, even those you can't think about. Like the
Mhm.
issue with a model is I'm not saying models are not helpful. Tools are very useful. Maps are useful, even if they're not the territory. But a lot of our thinking is about like making a space that would work no matter what kind of thinking people have. Right.
Mhm.
Like that is a kind of different question. Like you could almost say the difference between a meta architecture or a space or an incubator and a model is that you're trying to think black swans, like the unknowns, unknowns, and what people can enter into. And I would say that's a lot for me of my interest. Now, I would say that we certainly are going to emphasize particular ways of reaching a conclusion that we think are different and very concrete. And typically, there's calculation and apprehension. Like apprehension being, I look at a car and say, that's a car, versus calculate, which is 2 + 2 = 4. And
Mhm.
typically, most like as far as I can tell, reading personality types by Jung or all the different is like basically everyone does both in the same way that everyone does left and right, but
Mhm.
everyone tends to overfit one. Everyone tends to
Mhm.
be overly habituated in one way of knowing, which then also trains them to think they don't need the other way of knowing and that everyone needs spaces to gain the other. Like there's
Mhm.
clearly introverts and extroverts, right? But
Yeah.
I would argue that what is needed is everyone has to become an ambivert. Everyone actually has to gain a synthesis of both. Now that's going to look different, but there's no like I would say that there's no one who can get away with merely expressing their more innate personal tendencies. Because all innate personal tendencies tend to actually become toxic eventually. They tend to dominate. Like every personal expression must come into a relationality of which refines and challenges it. So
Mm.
to so
Mm.
to me, like to talk about personality types is to say everyone starts with a different set of starting positions. And that gives some people advantages as X, others disadvantages at Y, and so on and so forth. But nobody's starting positions. There's no possible starting positions of which make it unnecessary for people to come into relational contexts that refine those starting conditions. Now, of course, how they are refined and what that unlocks cannot be known except in the laboratory of relationality and actually bringing and in contact. So to me, what I'm going to say is instead of having a model of personality types, we have a phenomenology that justifies the necessity of spaces of relationality that test all personality types to bring out things in personality types and complexities that cannot come out in isolation. I almost want to say I'm really interested in personality complexity versus personality type. And complexity is emergence. I'm much more, you see, for me, basically, we're in the age where all personality types have to actually come into constraints against otherness to generate complexity in them that can't come out otherwise, because no personality type is innately sufficient to handle the challenges of global pluralism and otherness and all of that. So that's how I'd answer
Would you would you say that's in the same line or a similar strain of thought that good and evil are so the getting by or getting over the notion of good and evil is similar to this concept that your predispositions, your personality as it is, say, against or away from the other, it's not good or bad, but necessitates, I guess, really coming into form or coming into being or coming into relationship with the other. That so I guess what I'm trying to say is, from what I understand of your notion of good and evil, is that I was actually listening to your and Michelle's conversation. I forget which video it was, but on the plane ride back from Louisiana, talking about the notion that good has become uh, disassociated with the notion of true, and then that has been disassociated from the notion of beautiful, and that I guess ultimately it needs beauty, or beauty is the only um, I guess transcendental that is sort of above the ability to subjectivize or relativize, like how good has been relativized or how truth has been relativized. Do you think that there's some sort of notion in which I guess your personality, it's not good or bad, it's just incomplete until it comes into contact? Yeah.
that's it. That's 100%. And basically, but on what you were saying on the good and evil, which I
Hmm.
think is really important. So basically, every personality type is ultimately not going to realize its fullness without beauty, and beauty is only found in relationality encounters with otherness. And
Hmm.
our argument is that the true and the good and the beautiful are equal, but in beauty. Like without be, you could almost say that beauty is equal and greater than true and good, because you got this.
Could you I'm sure you're aware of it, sort of the Orthodox understanding of the Trinity as a monarchical Trinity, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken,
Yep,
in the
yep,
sense
yep.
that they're all equal, but the Father holds a sort of, and I'm not
Primacy.
even saying I
Sure.
ascribe to that, but that is the first sort of image that comes to my mind when you're talking about truth, goodness, and beauty. With beauty, they're all being equal, but beauty holds a sort of holds a sort of primacy without being inherently prime. Does that track or?
Yes, that's basic. And again, I'm not going to say it perfectly overlines with the Orthodox idea, but as I understand it, there's a certain suggestion that it is possible to speak about Jesus as a normal human being, historic, et cetera, so forth. You could talk about the spirit as, vibe, or the spirit just kind of in a kind of new age sense, but it's very difficult to talk about the Father as Father versus vague God, and not necessarily be referring to a divine reality. So there's
Yeah.
something about the Father that is
Mm,
necessary for disclosing the fullness of Jesus and the Holy
that's
Spirit.
interesting. That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
and so even if they're equal, nevertheless, there is something about the Father without which you can't make sense of experiences of Jesus or the Holy Spirit. But you
Yeah.
could, because you could argue in the Torah, there's experiences of the Father without Jesus and the Holy Spirit so much, right? Now, of course, the argument is the Spirit was there all along. I understand that. But there's an idea that you
Mhm.
can meaningfully discuss the Father as divine without appeal to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. But you can't
Hmm.
necessarily make sense of Jesus or the Holy Spirit as divine without appeal to the Father, right?
Interesting.
Now,
Interesting. Yeah.
that therefore that sense that the Father is higher could just be contingent on our finitude, though, right? Like actually Jesus and the Holy Spirit were always divine, we just weren't able to see it without reference to the Father in a certain way, right? Or it could be speaking to some essential reality that is harder to get at. Now,
Hmm.
my tendency, so likewise, my argument would be that we can make sense of goodness in terms of finitude without reference to something divine. We can make sense of truth
Hmm.
without reference to something divine, but we can't make
Hmm.
sense of beauty. Now, beauty, though, I don't mean merely aesthetic. It's much
Yeah.
closer to a mystical experience, much
Hmm.
stronger to, and you can't make sense of that without basically appealing to a divine reality, or you could just call it an illusion, of course, but you can do that with God the Father. You can say it's an illusion, but if you call it an illusion, it's not going to help make sense of the good and the true, right? So there's
Hmm.
something about where the it is in beauty that the fullness of truth and goodness is realized, and in its fullness, beauty, truth, and goodness are equal, but you need beauty for that equality. And so,
Hmm.
likewise, it could be the case that there's something about you need the Father in order for the equality of all the pieces of the Trinity, right? But then,
Hmm.
of course, in that state of equality, then the Son is used for the equality. It works the other way, right? But it doesn't work the other way except in beauty, in the Father, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of the tricky move. Like it's that symbol that means greater than but equal to with the underline, like the little with the equal
Yeah.
to. That's how I've come to think about beauty.
Yeah.
And so for me,
It's almost
so
like
it,
a like you were saying, it's a perspective
yes,
over, but
yes,
in reality. But I guess yeah, it's interesting that you're saying is it in essence or is it in just simply in perspective?
and
Yeah, yeah,
contingency. And
yeah.
you see, there comes to be like, if it was in essence, then perhaps it is justified because Jesus himself says basically the Father is over me and et cetera,
Mhm.
so forth, which means there might be an essential humility in the person of the Trinity that is the Son that actually is acknowledging the Father over it, right? But then, of
Mhm.
course, God with John the Baptist, this is my Son of whom I'm well pleased. Son is a term for heir. So then you could say there's a kind of
Mhm.
humility in the Father toward the Son, right? And then
Mhm.
Jesus is like the Holy Spirit will be sent out, and you're going to do things greater than me,
Greater than me, yeah.
right? And so there's this interesting thing where there could be a humility in each of the persons, acknowledging the other persons as higher, but they all do it, therefore it's equal, right?
Mhm.
Like there's always this interesting greater but equal to dimension
Mhm.
to the persons of the Trinity, and I think beauty is uniquely positioned to help us experience the greater but equal to dimension of the transcendentals. There's something in the transcendentals that is not merely equal but greater than and equal to that
Mhm.
is that is hard to think, but is something I think we kind of constantly gesture at, especially in the experience of beauty, because that seems to be the hardest to capture into finitude.
Mhm.
Because as soon as we see something beautiful, we naturally say that's good and that's true, right? We almost
Mhm.
can't help ourselves, but almost as evidence of the kind of supremacy of beauty, when I say, oh, it's true, there's a car there, I'm not so naturally pushed to say that's beautiful, right? I can say that, but it's not as natural to just kind of be like, oh, it's true that that's a car. Oh, that's a good car because it will get me to the bank. It's a good, but beautiful
Yeah.
doesn't feel right. But when I see like an extraordinary work of art or a dialogos that really takes off, it's much easier to say that was beautiful, good, and true. Almost as if
Mhm.
we know that there's something about the beautiful that includes the other two, but the other two don't so easily include the beautiful. Now,
Yeah.
the argument would be without the other two, though, you can't have the beautiful. Like the
Mhm.
true and the good are necessary for the strike of beauty. So
Yeah.
it's like concentric
Mhm.
circles where beauty entails the other ones and they all entail, but you have to get beauty to see the fullness of all the others. So
Yeah.
likewise, if you encounter the person of Jesus, and let's say you were alive and encountered Jesus, but don't reference him to the Father, well, then the fullness of Jesus wouldn't come out, right? Like if you
Mhm.
just see him as a guru or a
Yeah.
rabbi, then the fullness of what he's teaching would not come out. Well, in fact, you'd say he was a heretic ultimately because he makes
Mhm.
claims that go against Judaism. And then furthermore, when you see the movement of his followers, you might just say they're all in a cult or something, unless you have reference to the Father and how he's working through Jesus. So
Mhm.
that dimension is a way to think about the beautiful. And I guess what I want to say is that the fullness of every possible personality type does not come out except in the beautiful. And
Mhm.
so, like, it is only in the experiences that bring them out, that is in encounter with otherness, that is in
Mhm.
relationality in space, that you can't even get the fullness of the personal expression without the beautiful, which then will entail the personal expression, but is also over it.
Mhm.
And in that way, then good and evil. So then the thing that this would mean is that good basically is not good or ultimately good unless it is beautiful, right? And that will entail the
Mhm.
good. And there's something about evil because there's a problem in Christian theology of trying to describe what evil is. Like if you say it's a privation, which typically works, but there's a certain weakness, like when you say that evil is just the absence of good. Well, that
Mhm.
works, but then there's also a way that do we really want to say the Holocaust was weak? Like it was an absence, right? It seems like
Mhm.
it had substance, right? Well, if we say that evil is disordered beauty, like it is a
Mhm.
denial of beauty, then there is a kind of substance there, but it's an auto-cannibalistic substance. It's a substance
Mhm.
that's in like it's in a campaign of revenge against the beautiful. But since it's because Nazism was full of truth and goodness. It's true that, the Nazis
Mhm.
are the best. It's good if the Nazis take over the world, right? And of course, they
Mhm.
had their form of beauty that was the pageantry of the Nazi
Yeah.
campaigns. But the problem is that's aesthetics. Like that's something Jock can
Mhm.
emphasize. That's just symmetry. Beauty is the you must change your life. That sort of strike. Evil tends to be a way to think about evil can be where you have the strike of beauty and you say no. Beauty
Mhm.
says you must change your life and you say no. Well, now you're Lucifer because you're basically rebelling, right? And there's something about evil tied to a rebellion against beauty that might give the notion a stronger
Yeah. Wait.
substance,
Yeah.
weight, than simply privation, even though there's obviously truth to a theology of privation.
Yeah.
Evil would be a lack of beauty that denies it's lacking beauty and doesn't need it. And
Mhm.
so then in this sense, evil is a disordered relationship to beauty as opposed to evil being its own separate substance from goodness. But it
Yeah. 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 It's
nevertheless,
still in
the reason
relation to, yeah.
Yes, and to close, it nevertheless, I wanted to have a kind of substance. I wanted to have a kind of existence. Otherwise, it seems too shadowy and vague. But it's an
Mhm.
existence of which is that is in rebellion against beauty,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
therefore it still gets its existence from God. It's not a different
Yeah. Mhm.
substance. Its existence comes from God, but a rebellion against God,
Yeah.
which is relational. Now, of course, the argument would be it's impossible to rebel against God, right? Like you can't, if you saw God, you'd rebel against him. Well, if we believe in the fall of Lucifer, I'm not so sure. I think it takes remarkable effort to rebel against God, but it is quite clear that God doesn't force the Israelis to go straight to the promised land. He doesn't, like they
Mhm.
saw the Red Sea, for goodness sakes, right? And also, too, I do wonder if that there can, like, there's a difference between experiencing what we can experience of God or even angels can experience of God in the essence of God to himself. Like the essence
Mhm.
of God to himself is no doubt undeniable, but then arguably only the three persons of the Trinity can handle that without dying, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
way that other entities experience God could be of a lesser degree or else they
Yeah.
die,
Yeah, necessarily so. Yeah.
and yet that lesser degree makes space for
Mhm.
rebellion. Um,
What, yeah, what, I mean, just, I'm curious because I think it would be an interesting or fruitful little tangent, but I guess what is it about, say, receiving too much of God that is dangerous or hazardous? And what is it about being able to receive more of God when, in a sense, you are making less of yourself? I think that's
yeah.
an interesting thought that I'd be curious what you think.
No, that's excellent. Well, again, when God is saying, get behind the cleft of the rock, Moses, looking at, there's this interesting idea in the Bible that if God shows up, you need to like be careful, right? Because it can
Yeah.
overwhelm you. And yet there are also visions of God sitting on the throne, who will I send, etc. And there seems to also be differences between dreams and visions of God, and a direct experience of God, and then it seems to be tied to the degree of His glory and how much it shows, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
In a kind of axiomatic sense, the only being who can experience the fullness of God is God, because glory is something existential. It is ontological, and let me explain what I mean by that. Um, let's think of a situation when you did something embarrassing and everyone saw you do it. Don't you feel it like on a deeper level? And it's not, and it's emotional, but it's almost like deeper than emotional, because then you're still thinking about it later on. It's memory, it's
Yeah.
emotional, and it's like really holding you, and you kind of feel it. You can even see you can also feel your energy drain. Let's say you do something embarrassing the next day, you may not want to get out of bed in the morning, right? Or
Yeah.
you feel tired, or you can't focus. It's like this complete disorganization of your being,
Mhm.
right? But then also think of a time where you had an extraordinary experience of beauty. Didn't you feel like you could accomplish anything? You could talk all day, like energy just came out of nowhere, et cetera, so forth,
Mhm.
right? Um, the reason why I bring that up is because there are seemingly our entire being is affected by experiences and certain experiences, right? That like emotionally, it energetically, completely transforms us, right? Glory is that kind of experience, right? And
Mhm.
perhaps there is something about all energetic experiences that have some degree of glory in them, or taste of the glory, or taste of the holiness, right? And that experiences of radical shame can feel a loss of glory, or a rejection of glory,
Mhm.
or things like that. Like Jock and Javier Luber and I will, we've had discussions where the opposite of beauty is not ugly, but shame. Like the
Mhm.
opposite of beauty is actually shame, more than ugly. The opposite of the
Mhm.
aesthetic is ugly.
Yeah.
But the point is that there is an energetic experience based on the kind of there's an energetic shift based on the kind of experience you have. And there's an idea that God is the ultimate energetic experience in this way, right? And
Mhm.
it's going to affect you on a being, like an ontological level, right? So the issue is that basically only God can experience the energetic fullness of God. You're not God, therefore, if you do, you die, because you'd have to
Mhm.
not be God. You'd have to be God to do that, which would mean there's more than one God, and that would be axiomatically problematic, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So part of the issue is that if you say I can experience all of God at once, then that must be a denial of God's uniqueness. Thus, it must, by
Mhm.
definition, be heretical, right? And perhaps, because there's always a mystery of why Lucifer fell, which of course is one of the great mysteries of the Bible, but if it's alluded to, there's this idea that all ascend the throne, Isaiah, etc., right? Well, a way to read that is Lucifer is like, I can handle the fullness of God. Like I can be God.
Mhm.
I can handle the fullness of God in his glory, right? By definition, that's a heretical claim. And so that is going to be, well, inverting. It's going to pull you away from God, right? Because
Mhm.
because it kind of has to be, because you're saying I'm God. Well, there can only be one God, so you have to kind of isolate into your own universe where you are the only God, right?
Mhm.
God
Mhm.
in a sense gives you what you want. It's just that you then have to have your own isolated hell, your own isolated world, right? But when you say something like I am not worthy of the fullness of God, or in a sense of I can't handle the fullness of God, well, actually, now you're in a position where you're claiming I'm not God, and that paradoxically means you actually could receive the glory of
More.
God.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
difference you could say of Lucifer and potentially images and likeness of God is where Lucifer wants the glory all at once, we want it through time, gradually, right? There's a
Mhm.
real sense in which there's a real sense in which there's no part of the glory of God that's actually denied to human beings. It just has to be through time, ergo eternity.
Interesting. Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
has to be an
Interesting.
eternal process, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not, in a sense, it's not that humans cannot experience God's glory. And even in a sense, the fullness of God, as much as possible to experience the fullness of God and God still be distinct as God, it just has to be through a process of eternity. It has to be gradually through time, right? The Luciferian move is against the gradualness. The Luciferian
Mm,
move is against limit, a moving
mm,
limit. It's a moving horizon. Like another way to put this is God's glory can
mm.
be it can be a horizon to us, but it can't be an arrival. It can't be a point you arrive at, right?
The journey, it's
Yeah.
always the journey of arriving to God, but never the actual point of arriving at God. Therefore, you would be God in that sense.
Exactly. And there's a way to
Yeah.
look at relationships as basically that. Like relationships are that very journey into the glory of your personality type, like into the glory of God, and thus the full expression and blossoming of your personality type. Relationship and journey metaphysically are like the same thing through
Mhm.
time. And so
Yeah.
the reason why when we say God wants a relationship with us, it's also like God wants us to go on a journey of his glory in him that is
Mhm.
ever developing, right? And
Yeah.
again, that can seem vague, but think about people you've met that have sent you on journeys, right? That have sent you on developing. Like we've all had the experience of a relationship actually sending us on a kind of developmental journey, right? The most
Mm.
obvious example is marriage, girlfriend relationship. That sends you off to do things you otherwise
That
wouldn't
it
do.
does. That it
And that
does. Yeah.
makes you a person you otherwise wouldn't be. And you actually find the truth of your personality type in that journey, right? That's God.
Mm.
That's a relationship with God, which is a journey of development for your sake. Because there's another way too, where it's like, oh, is God so egotistical that he needs a relationship with everyone? It's for everyone else's sake. It's like, yeah, he wants. Why does God want a relationship with us? Does he need it? There's some sense in which he's chosen it because he chose
Mm.
creation, but it's a gift because we need it. We need the journey. We need to calling out, just like marriage is something you need to make you do things and become things you otherwise would never become. But that
Mm.
is how you gain and relate to glory in a way that is not Luciferian. Because
Mm.
Luciferian just wants it now, in a sense. I want the
Yeah.
whole of it. I don't want the journey of
Yeah.
eternity. I want God's glory in a point,
Yeah.
which is a hell.
Which I guess you could, I mean, you can almost tie it onto the sort of the left right brain hemisphere, like to
Sure.
want to want the fullness of God in a point, almost is to say to want it underneath you, to want it where you can manipulate or control or to quote unquote have it versus to experience it, which would be a more right hemisphere. You experience God versus you know, have, and can control God in this left hemisphere Luciferian sense.
Yeah, and you see what happens to relationships that make that mistake. When you want to have a wife, have a person, have a friend, then it goes to crap. But if you
Yeah.
want that horizon and journey that is only possible with them or thanks to them, then that is a
Yeah.
completely different quality of experience.
Yeah.
And so it goes with life in general. If you do something because you want a definite end or there's an object that you want,
Mm.
right? Then, it's like the weight of glory, C.S. Lewis saying nothing you get in this life will satisfy you. Yeah, nothing satisfies because what human beings want is not an object, but a horizon. Like we don't long for possessing anything. What we long for is a horizon according to which we always journey and develop. And it's not like when people say things
Mm.
like the journey is more important than the end, there's a sense in which that's true, but it's also more, if you're not careful, that can be self-sabotage because you just keep yourself from reaching end so that you always have a journey, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't engineer an ever developing journey because that's going to be self-sabotage or avoidance or stuff like that. What you have to do is learn to relate to phenomenon as an ever. The only way you get this right is with mystery. Like you have, but that requires an orientation to phenomenon in reality where you experience them as ever deepening, right? That's where you get this journey that's
Yeah.
greater than the end because it turns out the journey is eternity and the end is the ever
Mm.
expanding horizon that is found in that, which changes you into a being forever greater beauty, right? But you can only do that by changing your orientation to the thing right in front of you, which you're not going to learn to do without relationship. Like relationship is what changes you into the kind of being that can do that because it surprises you, because it encounters you and runs the risk of destroying you. Just like encountering God can destroy you, right? Like God can destroy you if you're
Mm.
not like we're dealing with serious things here. And yet the only life worth living is one that deals with those serious risks because they open up
Yeah.
the fullness of being.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the culture, or at least the general philosophy or the ideology of most of Western culture being materialistic is to say that the point is a thing, or the point of life is a point versus a more holistic approach or journey or relationship. So it seems, and obviously this feels very true to say that we've been taught that the point of life is to get enough money so that, like, it's always been get something so, instead of this so coming before the, it just seems so paradoxical, like this understanding or this philosophy so paradoxical to at least what I grew up believing or grew up being told, like you just need enough money, you just need enough this. And I'm like, yeah, this seems to be saying almost the exact opposite. I mean, yes, money is important because it facilitates the ability to do so many things that are so wonderful, but again, that money is, and I think this ties back into your whole value, your the whole problem with value is like, yeah, money is just pointing at value, but now we've looked at value as just money. So
No, it's we don't know what money is for. Studebaker was recently talking about that, a friend of mine, and like we don't know what money is for. Like we don't know why we want it. Like it's interesting because we kind of do a sleight of hand on ourselves where we say, well, you got to pay the bills, but then it becomes you got to have money to be happy. Like those blur. Like paying the bills and a fulfilling life kind of get blurred together. Now, if you ask anyone directly, do you think having money makes you happy? I don't know of anyone that says yes. Like everyone's like, no, no. But the truth is not what people say. The truth is what people do, right?
yeah, yeah.
And basically what you see is there is a lack of understanding of how to properly relate to money so that you quote unquote pay the bills and can open doors because money is opportunity. You can invest in things and so on and so forth. And how also to not make the mistake of, even if you say otherwise, practically treating money as value, right? I think,
Mhm.
there's a bunch to be said here. Basically, we don't have diversification. Like there's this idea where, like we were saying on should you seek purpose or money, right? And people think it's a one or the other, but in a certain way, it's not. It can't be a one or the other because you do have to pay the bills, but without purpose, your marriage will suck. Like without purpose, you're not going to have things to talk about. You're not going to have horizons. Like it's poor diversification if you
Mm.
don't figure out how to allot a certain amount of time to pay your bills and a certain amount of time to make yourself the kind of person that's interesting in conversation, interesting and interested, as
Yeah,
Michelle liked to put it, right? So
yeah.
you got to, like, again, people talk about diversification for stocks, make sure you have commodities, treasuries, and all this other stuff, but we don't talk about we don't talk about diversification for ways of life. And so as a
Mhm.
result, or modes of being. And as a result, therefore, we
Mm.
overly habituate ourselves into the money form, the commodity form, and thus come to treat
Safer. Yeah.
safer. And we pay our bills, but then we don't know what for, right? Like, and yeah, I mean, generally speaking, there is something where for me, I think the way it's talked about in psychoanalysis is, and I think Lewis is pointing to this in many thinkers. Generally, we have the problem of how to sublate desire into drive, or extrinsic motivation into intrinsic motivation. And desire is where you say, I want a new car. Drive is where, say, you find an innate value in just having this conversation or taking a walk or being with people, or writing or reading. Like, are you getting paid for it? No, but you have a drive to do this thing because you believe in it. It does something that might be hard to put into words, but it opens something up that otherwise
Mm.
is not possible. So another way to word that, as I spoke with Owen about, is we don't want objects, we want horizons. Like we want a horizon of experience, which I think is God's
Mm.
glory. God's glory can't be an object, it has to be a horizon. Um,
Mm.
Practically what that can look like is that we as human beings, um, we really want to witness something. Like we long for a capacity to say, I've been talking with Jedi and C Money and Jocken and other people, but we long for the ability to like look at something like this crepe myrtle here and really, really be taken by it. Like we want to be really taken by it, right? Like surprised by our experience of it. Like we long to have conversations that we're interested, like we're just
Mhm.
in it, like we're invested, like we're pulled in, like we long to have a work that as we do the work, we actually feel like it could go on forever. Our energy grows as we do
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
way to
Yeah.
put this, maybe we can put it this way. We long to continually and regularly experience the world in a manner that increases our energy and engagement. Like most of us feel like most of us, I really do think, I know I've been speaking a lot about energy with
Hmm.
Michelle, but I think there's something about energy as more than just biological energy that kind of speaks to spirit and what we kind of long for. Like most of our lives and most people basically experience energy as something. You wake up, you have energy, it goes down. Maybe you take a nap and it goes up and it goes down. And their life is just this kind of sloping hill, really. And they're just trying to get by. And you have bursts of it. And maybe on the weekend, if you go, and then maybe you can go on a trip or go to King's Dominion or go somewhere and the energy goes up, but then it kind of goes back down. And really, we're stuck in a kind of slope of energy. Maybe we can get some cheats on the weekend or do some things to boost it, but it feels like entropy wins. Like it just kind of entropy is going to win, right? What we long for is figuring out our lives are not at the mercy of a slope downward of energy each day. We long for regularly
Hmm.
just being surprised by energy appearing. Like, oh my, I feel alive. I feel alive, right? And I associate that with horizons. We long for a feeling that we're just not at the mercy of a loss of energy each day, that we sleep and eat to kind of fight, but we're inevitably going to lose. And sleeping and eating and then doing fun things or buying new cars or whatever are actually part of the same campaign to feel like we're not just at the mercy of a loss of a kind of this fate. It's almost like fate. By the end of the day, you're going to be exhausted and tired and it's going to go away, right? What we long for is basically a life where we're surprised throughout the day. And of course, you can take naps and get tired. That's part of being human being. But also, we don't want to feel like we're at the mercy of that. Like it's a fate, like it's a prison. We don't want to feel like our energy is a prison. What we want to constantly go throughout the day is kind of being surprised by bursts of energy, surprise of bursts of focus, of like appearance, not bursts like in a bad way, but like you're just
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
You just feel alive, right? Um, I don't think you can do that without conversation, relationality, learning to speak, pursuits of passion, all the stuff that's being done on the social coordination mechanism, TLC. Like all of this is actually part of habituating and training the human being to actually be the kind of being whose life does not feel imprisoned by energy, like a fate of a
Yeah.
repetition
Mm.
of a downhill, but a constant surprise of energetics. And
Yeah.
trying to actually learn how to make spaces that have energetic changes. Because we all know that weird way that, you know, you get into the right conversation or you get into the right line of work and suddenly just energy comes out of
Mm.
nowhere. That I think often when people talk about meaning, like Vervaeke and the meaning crisis, the
Okay.
qualitative experience of meaning is energy. Like that is evidence to people that this thing is meaningful because when they're in
Mm.
it, there's a gain of energy. And a sign of a gain of energy is a gain of focus. Like when focus and energy
Like
goes
flow
together.
state generally.
Flow
Yeah.
states, energy, right brain and energy goes together. The problem is the left brain is that downward hill thing. It's like the left brain doesn't know how to stop the downward hill experience of energy. It is
Hmm.
just this.
Well,
It
it's
is
just
just,
purely after expending instead
yep,
of
yep.
it's purely expending, which necessarily is to deplete, while the right hemisphere is to less expend, but to more almost, I guess, wallow isn't the word, but to just be embodied or to just be in the experience of energy. Um,
It's absolutely, it's more gestalt. It's more like the experience of energy and eternity, which is this dance, which is this not expenditure, but this actually just, it caught it, just the ball's about, it caught it and it's like in the air, almost like grace,
the arc of a
constantly.
story, like
Yeah, the
there's
arc
a
of a story. Absolutely.
yeah.
There's an energetic to the arc of a story. And there's this kind of, you almost could say Nietzsche's tightrope walker, right? Like there's this kind of feeling like, oh, how's it? Oh, it's still here. Oh, God catches you. The spirit catches you. And it just kind of keeps going. So you don't like going down a hill is falling off the tightrope. Up, time for bed. Up, I'm tired. Oh, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
As opposed to this certain catching experience. And
Yeah.
that I think is the energetics of eternity. And there's something about
Mhm.
the right brain. I really do think basically there's this lurking question with McGilchrist. Well, how do we habituate ourselves out of the left brain? Because you can't just because do I just flip a switch and say, you know what, I'm going to be left brain from now on? It doesn't work that way. It's going to be your habituation and
Yeah, for
subconscious and
sure.
things, right? So how do you do that? So how do you habituate yourself toward the right brain? Well, spaces like this, TLC, those kind of works with conversation, the ability, well, doing the courageous, that's the big one, is most people
Mm,
end up in a fate of entropy because they don't face their fears. Like that's a major
mm,
one, because faith
yeah.
as courage is a major source of negentropy,
Mm,
of this energy. So yes, for me, meaning, like, what is, when people say their life has meaning or their life doesn't have meaning, what are they referencing to make that claim, right? Is it because when they're asked, they don't have an answer? In my experience, that, like, a lot of people that would say their life is meaningful, they themselves can struggle to actually answer why it's meaningful if you ask them, right?
mm,
Um, just like the person who says their life is meaningless can struggle to say why it's meaningless if you ask them,
mm,
right? Or what they could do to change it. My claim, and again, it could be countered, but my claim is often when people say their life is meaningful, they're they're referencing in their mind an energetic experience, a qualitative way that they experience the world, which is more energetic than something they can put into words, right?
yeah.
And that's a horizon, not an object. That's like God's glory. And it is, the sign of it is energetics. And the issue is, the
Mm,
reason why we can fall into the trap of objects is because they give a temporary energy increase. It's like a
mm,
dopamine hit. It's like a candy. You get a
yeah.
new car, you're excited. There is a temporary energy hit, but it's
Yeah.
not sustainable, and it's not part of your being. It's external, so it will go away. So we're looking for energetics. I mean, we're constantly searching
Mm,
for energetic experiences, and beauty is basically the crown of energetic, of strike of energy. Like, it brings with it the energy to change your life.
yeah. Yeah. I'm curious if you want to maybe define energetics, just so I mean, I get it. I understand what energetics are, but I'm curious if you would define it just to give a little bit more concreteness, but also, I guess, I'm curious your understanding of like finding a job that fills the passion, fills this energy meter while also you make money doing. Is there like a danger in that like a sort of hidden danger in pursuing a job that really does fulfill you, but is also your means of making money? Like I'd be curious, maybe you divulging a little bit about what you may consider the danger in having a job that is your passion as well, and then also, yeah, like talking a little bit about what is energy.
No, I mean, those are excellent. I mean, certainly I'm using energetics, perhaps not in the way that other people may use it. I mean, generally I'm thinking a study of energy, and I would even say a phenomenology of energy. Like, not just kind of a study or something like that, but really an awareness of how energy changes. I think for most people, energy is not something they directly pay attention to. They may notice when it's gone, like, because they're like, oh, I'm tired, or I need a coffee or something, but really kind of bringing it into their awareness, and then also learning what they're able to experience relative to the kind of energy they have. Like,
Mm,
that's also for me. Like, so for me, I kind of mean energetics as a phenomenology, which is tied to an awareness in the
mm,
McGilchrist way. And it's an awareness of where you're really paying attention to what conditions create what energy.
mm,
When I'm afraid of something and don't do it, my energy goes away. When
mm,
I face my fear, the energy goes up. When I don't do something I need to do, then I feel blocked. When I do the thing, I feel unblocked. When I have, a conversation where everyone seems interested and interesting, it can go on forever. When I have a conversation with someone who feels judgmental or feels like they're never happy and nothing that anyone does, there's no energy there and you want to get out of it. Like, paying attention to the changes. People may talk about vibes, they may talk about resonance, but that's what I have in mind by energetics, is a phenomenon, like a way of life that, instead, like, I guess there's a way in which it's a kind of pragmatism, but it's a phenomenological pragmatism. Instead of paying attention to, if I do X, I get Y, or X works because the hammer fixes the problem, you're more of paying attention to conditions that unlock or block energy. and actually
Mhm.
getting skilled in that and actually developing a skill and an art in that and being
Mm.
aware of that and like not denying it or think like energetics, I guess a way maybe more elegantly to put it, I'm referring energetics. I mean by that a belief that it's not random. Like I like
Mhm.
energy is not random. That there's a
Yeah.
reason, like there's an art, there's a situation, there's an environment that
Yeah.
incubates energy X way versus Y way.
Yeah.
And I think also then energy and joy get tied together, and then there's actually a
Mhm.
judgment of joy because when you experience like changes of energy, it can bring out the worst in you if you haven't been doing what you're supposed to do and you want to destroy it. And that gets into
Mhm.
evil, like we were talking about earlier.
Ooh.
I think actually
Yeah.
many people
Oh,
can
that's
experience,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, many people can
Like on a
experience it.
psychological level,
Yeah.
that's very
Yeah. We
interesting.
want to
Yeah.
destroy it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can also want to destroy it in ourselves, self destruction, because if we
Mhm.
realize we can change, then we're responsible for it. And that can call something out of us. And we rather maintain, we do like a lot of evil, quote unquote, is maintaining plausible deniability, is actually maintaining a state where we're not necessarily doing something wrong because we deny ourselves the experiences of which would force us to acknowledge
Mm.
we did something wrong.
Yeah, you're
So,
sort of living on the cusp of good and evil. Like I
yes,
guess
yes, absolutely.
yeah, like I mean plausible deniability is obviously a very good way to put it. But I mean I was just watching a video today where it was this person, it was a novel, but this person in this story was witnessing something very evil, and they got this sort of thrill just watching,
Yes.
but still maintaining that. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't do it. But there was this genuine thrill in seeing such evil being perpetrated, but not actually participating in it. Um,
No, that's a
yeah.
perfect example. There is absolutely something that kind I think it would be a larger topic. And I am so sorry. This Thursday I do have obligations like 20 or so minutes, and I'm really sorry
Nope.
about that. Often when Christians talk about evil or just people in general, they kind of refer the way that they think about evil, I almost want to say isn't sophisticated enough. You need to
Mm,
read novels. Like you really need to read literature to see how evil works. And
mm,
because evil is really cunning. And it's also
mm,
very strange. Like there's something revelatory about evil. Like we enjoy watching stuff burn. Why? Well, it's not really a why. It's almost like because there's something that gets a thrill of it. It's deeper. It's this deepness. And there's this
mm,
$1 million question of how to think like Protestant fallenness with Catholic sanctification and then East Orthodoxy theosis. I think that's like ground zero of truly one of the major tensions. And that's something Michelle and I have been talking a lot about, like how to think all those together. Because I do think they go together, but it's not because the Protestant warns that I think the Protestant, or especially someone who wants to stress total depravity. Now, that's a little bit of a, one has to go into detail because, Calvin, honestly, yes, he stresses predestination and total depravity, but it's a very small portion of the Institutes, which are mostly about grace. Like for him, total depravity follows from a strong doctrine of grace because he wants to give God all the glory. And he's afraid that if you say humans do anything, you're taking glory from God, right? And for
mm.
him, that's just opening the door to lots of potential problems, right? And so Protestants, and then I'm going to get to the work question because that's a big one. Protestants are concerned, and I'm saying not me, I'm just saying like the general ethos of Protestantism.
Yeah.
Protestantism can have a concern. And then, of course, the problem is Protestantism means 10,000 things to different people. There's
It's
Luther,
true.
and then there's Wigley,
Yeah.
and then it's really a major problem. Because like Lutheranism is pretty Catholic. So you get all of that. And then it's like, oh, is it just the government structure? Anyway, the point is that there's a concern in Protestant thinkers that Catholicism and Orthodoxy don't take evil seriously enough. Like that they're not, they become complacent because of an emphasis on holiness and sanctification means you stop being self-skeptical, right? But then
Mm,
Protestantism, because we don't, it doesn't necessarily train the discernment of evil, then just systematizes evil and says we're all fallen and we can't do anything because that's the easy way to deal with the problem, right? But if you say
mm,
no, evil is very cunning and very real, and you can't systemize it, and theosis is possible and sanctification. Oh, well, we have an entirely different game then. And I think that's actually the case. And really, what I mean to say is like what you read in literature, like what that idea that humans have a kind of innate ontological fallenness, that it's not merely ethical, but it's ontological, is shown in literature. Like it's shown in Iago of Othello. It's shown in Walker Percy's Lancelot. It's shown in Smilokhov in Brothers Karamazov. Excuse me. Like there's something about human beings that want to kick a sandcastle just to see what happens. Like the Joker, you could say, or like you see a beautiful spider web and you want to hit it with a stick. Why? You know what's going to happen if you do it, and yet you do it anyway. Or like when you're really mad at someone, you know if you say this, you can't go back, but you want to do it anyway. Why? Like why? There is something ontological about that. We have to go into detail about it, but also that ontology is precisely the same substance that if you resist opens up sanctification. And that's where I want to try to think, obviously the three major churches together is that actually the very movement of self-destruction is actually the very trials of sanctification. And so if we think those together, that would mean the ontology, the very ontology that creates this very cunning sin that's all about enjoying destruction, plausible deniety, self-destruction, irony, all of these things. That very ontology is the same challenge of sanctification. And so to me, that's how you start seeing it's the saint who becomes a devil. Like, you have to really have extraordinary potential for sanctification to become a high devil. Like it has to be the highest angel that becomes Satan, right? That's a revelation. That says something about a fundamental truth that the very ontology that gives us potential for theosis, or whatever language we want to use, is precisely the ontology of which affords to us the possibility of destroying a sandcastle, of destroying self-sabotage, right? And so literature is really important for having a grasp of how evil works. And actually, great literature about marriages, because marriage is where you find, that's where you see how evil works in extraordinarily cunning ways. Now one has to get into all that. But
that would be a good tangent to get into. But another time.
It's huge. Like again, the church talks too much, not to be the church talks too much about evil as lying or pornography or adultery or cheating or taking advantage of people, which of course is evil. No one is denying that. But they don't talk enough about evil being in the fact that we tend to be really nice to strangers and really mean to our loved ones. How we actually can intentionally avoid something to maintain plausible deniability to ourselves that we're a good person. How we can actually use comfort to avoid, sanctification. Right? These are all operations of evil. And that has to be discussed. But that requires a literary education. And I'm concerned that the church is not as educated in literature often as needed to describe those dynamics of evil. So
is it because of the nuance that you can get out of literature, essentially?
Oh, yes. And you got to learn to read. And I'm not saying I'm a master reader, but reading, there's something about learning to read that is necessary. Well, I would argue the skill of reading is what you actually use in relationships. Like you learn from books how to relate to people. In the act of interpretation and reading, those things kind of go together. But I think when you just describe something like pornography, that's obviously a problem. It's also kind of a low-hanging fruit, where if I talk about the problems of porn, who's going to disagree with me, right, in the church? No one. But if I talk about the dynamics of how we treat strangers good but bad, loved ones badly, what are you talking about? Like, that's vague. I don't know what you're getting at. And it's harder to get people on board with that vision of how evil can operate. But that's why they're vulnerable to it. And that's why it's happening to people, because it's hard to teach. So it's a major issue. On what you're saying about meaning and work and stuff. First off, because there is always the danger of money actually corrupting or getting in the way of the meaning making, one should treat with reverential fear the possibility of making money off what you find meaningful, right? Like one should not be all in, like eager. You know what I mean? Like in the same way, like reverential fear is not say fear God, but it's just be like, know what you're dealing with, right? like like know what you're dealing with. So similarly, money is not innately bad, but you really want to treat it with a certain deep respect, in the sense of it can change everything once it's involved, right?
Hmm.
I do think we're in the age, though, because of the complexity of our moment of history and global pluralism and all that, that basically we are no longer, in a certain sense, I want to almost say allowed, justified to put off facing this problem. That we actually have to think it, like really think the relation of money and meaning in a way that doesn't destroy both, right? But what that means gets into a bunch. But if I'm talking on a like a just an individual level, it's also similar to the idea of growth. Like, obviously we write books and there are people like, oh, you want to sell a lot of books, or what if you're the thing? Well, growth clearly destroys a whole lot of people. Like growth, like being successful destroys a whole lot of people, right?
Hmm.
And so on the idea of saying it would necessarily be good to grow or good to get money off your meaning, that may not be so, right?
Hmm.
Actually, that's not given, right? But also, you're not justified to say that it's never good to make meaning off your money, because that would be treating money as innately bad, right? Or you'd be treating it with a certain sort of power that it can corrupt meaning. But who are you to say that, right? Like
Hmm.
also, so that's a problem, right? So there is something about a reverential fear that nevertheless is open to the possibility of making money off what you find meaningful. But then there's also having to have the design and wit and discernment to figure out how to keep alive the thing that you find meaningful while also paying the bills, right? Which is a
Hmm.
design problem in a certain regard, right? And then
Hmm.
also being open to how God might bring those things together, right? Which also tend to, the thing is, if you start making money off of what you find meaningful, the other thing that tends to accompany that is authority. You gain authority in a field, like you gain authority over people, right?
Hmm.
Authority is pretty dangerous. Like if you're going to have authority over people, it's like God being like, I don't know if you want to be a pastor because they're going to be judged more harshly. Be
Hmm.
careful about that. So there's something about like meaning and money and growth that means you're probably going to gain authority and thus be judged more harshly. So,
Yeah.
and of course, there are many traditions, just like reading the Kabbalah, supposedly within, like there are certain religious or mystical traditions that say there are certain books you can't read till you're 40 because you won't understand them before then, right? Like, and
Yeah.
there's something also for me that I think about this problem, and is that it might be the case that until you're 40 or midlife, you actually couldn't handle making money off what you found meaningful, or you actually
Hmm.
couldn't handle major success without it destroying you, right? It is absolutely the case that being successful too early destroys like most people. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't totally destroy them, it tends to cut them off from horizons, which can be very,
Hmm.
very problematic, right? And so for me, on the practical level, it is I want to say one should not force their meaning thing to make money, right? They should not force it. They almost can be like Moses taking care of sheep until the burning bush, right? Because I do believe if you do what you're supposed to do in the spirit, that spirit comes calling. And then there are things you have to do, or you're supposed to do, and then it will require courage to do them. And then in those times you'll be like, I'm okay, God. I don't need to do that. I'm good. And it'll be like, nah, time to go. Like there's a way in which I think success is not good until you get to the place where you don't need it.
Hmm.
Those things kind of go together. But on the practical, because I know where to on the practical question. Um, Again, to get a clear signal on everything, you have to face all your fears in your life. Like that tends to generate. So look at your life and kind of be like, am I facing all my fears, or am I putting something off, or, am I putting something off, but maybe actually it's okay because I'm supposed to wait. Like really discern that. But then the day comes where it's time and you're just kind of facing, it's not really putting off, but waiting. Those energy, and these are all energetic things. Like to tell the difference between putting off and a wise waiting, pay attention to the energy. Do you like want to
Mm.
not get out of bed in the morning? Well, then you're probably not wise waiting. You're probably putting off, right? Is there an angry voice in your head all the time? Well, you're probably not wisely waiting. You're probably putting off, right? Are you like unable to stop thinking about how pissed off you are at someone? Well, then you're probably putting off something and not doing the courageous versus wisely waiting. Like pay attention if you want to, like, because at the highest level, on these high levels of developmental questions, if you grant me that phrase, the difference is very, 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 very subtle and it's not self-evident. So how do you tell the difference? Don't ask about the result. Don't ask about like quantitative things. Pay attention to your inner voice and your energy. And when I say inner voice, people are like, oh, wait to hear the Holy Spirit speak. Okay, of course that's an option. No, how are you using your inner voice? Are you talking about how
Yeah.
much you're mad at someone all the time or you hate this or what? Like, is it a negative voice constantly? Is it like, or, is it a voice that feels like it's killing your energy, right? And do you feel your energy going away? That is how, and if you feel all of that, then basically, yes, don't do anything impulsive, but that can be an indication of putting something off and not doing something courageous that needs to be done, right? But paying
Mm.
attention to those energetics. But on the practical level, basically, really, really do everything in your power to kind of, see that thing alive in you that is quote unquote meaningful. And when I say meaningful, is there something in your life that has this energetic experience that goes against the downhill, that has this
Mm.
kind of like the bursting, right? Like pay attention to the energy. Say, well, this thing seems to be where the energy is beyond just a downhill experience. There's like this, it just goes up. It doesn't follow a downward trajectory necessarily. Okay, then you need to keep doing that and you need to prioritize that. How you do that and is a design question. Before the whole say I'd get up at 5 a.m. to write and work on it. So you have to figure that out, and then you might have to negotiate with the boss and so on and so forth, which requires courage. But that's why you
Mm.
do it, because it'll actually give you a clearer signal on if that job is where you're supposed to be, right? Like if you have to sacrifice, like if the place you are working at will make no accommodations for the meaning, that will clarify the signal. But don't just decide it won't, like impulsively
Mm.
say they won't. No, face the boss, face the coworkers, and put yourself in the place of the courage of the claim and say, like, this isn't going to work. Don't just leave and not say
Yeah.
anything. Put yourself in the place of being like Jesus, who's being facing the crowd, right?
Yeah.
But you prioritize that, because that thing that has that energetic change, that's where your exponential potential is possible. That thing that you're doing is what can open doors you can't know about ahead of time, and what enables the possibility of relationships that open up work opportunities you'll never know. But none of that can be predicted, only prepared for. And it also
Mm.
just depends on how the spirit moves. And so you can't take it into your own power to say when it's time for X, Y, and Z, right? Your
Yeah.
responsibility is to keep it alive. Okay. So you keep it alive. And then you look at the work thing. And um, you figure out the work thing that is going to pay the bills, but also too, you do want to make sure you're getting paid enough. Like if you're not getting paid, like if you're going to do a job that basically is just paying the bills, then pay the bills. Like I hear a lot of people will be like, well, you got to pay the bills. Okay, well then get a job where you can pay the bills. And what I mean by that, maybe that's being a plumber or an electrician. Like I know you do electrical work. Like I just want to, like get something, because blue collar work can be in demand, that's going to pay the
Mm.
bills. Dang it. Like that's okay. But don't be doing the same where you're paying the bills and you're scraping to get by. Okay. And what I mean
Mm.
by that is then get really good at something to where someone's going to pay you good because you're really good at it, and or something that has asymmetrical opportunity, right? And do it well. Like do it well, dang it. That's okay. Especially especially when it fits into what's not taking your meaning, right?
Mm.
And then also, of course, I want to say, like, are you regularly putting yourself in places where you can meet people that open new opportunities, social networking? Are you going to like, are you putting yourself in living environments where surprising encounters can occur? Because that
Mm.
also is your unknown potential, right? What I want to say, there's a lot more. And if you have any, there's still time. There is something about, I guess what I'm also saying is believe in time. Like believe
Mm.
in time. Like believe that actually these impossible contradictions between meaning and work actually can work themselves out in time. The likelihood of them working themselves out by the time you're 20 is very low. By the time of them working out by the time you're 30 is low. By the time of them working out when you're 40 is higher but low. But actually, if you keep the faith on the meaning stuff, the ability of them working out starts to increase really rapidly as you move through midlife. Because you start developing a capacity, subjectivity, and ability to create value that is incredibly rare. And when you have that, that opens a lot of door. And also, too, the name of the game, like once you let's say you get your authority. Okay, and I'll throw it to you. Let's say you
No,
get your
no, you're good.
authority, you get your authority, you get your meaning and your money, and you're, I don't know, 32. You got to maintain that for 40 years. Like if you go into authority, like look at all these mega churches or people who had authority who fall. It's devastating. Like it's devastating. It really impacts millions, like lots of people in a bad way, right? Or let's say you have your flock of 40 who your meaning making work or your work or whatever really impacts in an important way. Okay. And you fall, right? It's a problem. It's a real big problem, right? And the reason why I say all that is because another reason why you want to believe in time and like letting God kind of work these things out is because let's say you get it at 60. Okay, you got 20 years, right? That's a long time. Like it's not simply about solving this problem, if you will, but maintaining it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The hard part is actually the maintaining. I think the
Mm-hmm.
maintaining is an underappreciated difficulty of this question. There's the
Mm-hmm.
question of how to do it, and that's kind of where a lot of the conversation stays. But there's actually the question of maintaining it, right? Like actually maintaining the authority in a manner that doesn't fall apart, which will negatively impact a lot of way, but actually maintaining it.
Yeah.
That is one of the reasons I think the likelihood of successfully maintaining it is it goes up as figuring out bringing money and meaning together is achieved in midlife, especially 40
Mm-hmm.
plus. I think that's actually almost as a spiritual sign is why most people have a crisis midlife, because that's an evidence that this was actually the time of kind of coming into, I want to say, authority, coming into the place of your ministry or so on, but you didn't because maybe you
Yeah.
over focused on money. Um, that there, so there's something about trusting in time, but it is not a passive waiting. Like one day there's going to be
Yeah.
a deus ex machina. No, you are actively right now doing the courageous things, cultivating the meaning, paying attention to energies, figuring out how to get really good at something that's going to generate money, or taking an entrepreneurial opportunity that could work very well and paying your bills, like paying them well, doing that well while cultivating all those things together that can actually bring to a place of authority that then you maintain. You have to
Mm-hmm.
maintain it. And then you have to maintain it without your marriage getting just like discarded or your children being under focused on. Like you're gonna have to come to the place where you keep the marriage, the children, the work, the spirit all together, right? Well, that sounds impossible. Well, then you can see where Moses is like, I'm good, God. I'm good with the sheep. I'm good, right? And you can see where these people are like, you don't have to anoint me. It's cool. God.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's a massive challenge. But if you learn the energetics and you do the development of the spirit along the way, you can do it. And it's like a miracle. Yes, because if you're going to shine with Christ likeness that attracts people into the beauty, it has to seem miraculous. And people are going to
Mm.
say, there's no way you can do that. No, it's by the power of God. Oh, it must be. It must be then. So like that, and that has a massive evangelical, but well, for me, and this opens another can of words I know we talked about before. That space of seeing, but not knowing how to get there. I
Mhm.
think a lot of prayer is about this. Like the question is, what is the role of prayer? I think prayer has a lot to do with participation and what God is doing. Not simply like there's a certain way of prayer is that praying all the time. Like there is something of like active and regular counseling is like, okay, God, well, what about this? Like, am I supposed like not just like asking I want to say there's something for me, at least, about prayer that's not necessarily asking, God, am I supposed to stay at this job or not? But God, what's the meaning of this energy? Like God, like
Mm.
what is this energy? Like what are you teaching me with this energy? Like
Mm.
with this experience, right? How is this for me becoming like you? Right? Like is
Mm.
this something and like show me. And actually also I think prayer is a lot more about showing Like, give me an experience to divulge as opposed to give me a syllogism, like a
Yeah, yeah,
question and
yeah,
answer. I'll ask a
yeah,
question, God will give me the answer in words. I think
yeah,
I think experience is a lot of how the Spirit works. It's like you're really paying attention, like,
yeah.
give me the experience. Like, okay, what's the difference between not wanting to get out of bed in the morning because it's 5:30 and I don't want to unload trucks, and the not getting out of bed in the morning that is the depression, that is a kind of sign that this is spiritually bad. There's a difference
Mm.
between not wanting to go to the venue because it's hard. Like, yeah, there are many times like, wow, there's going to be 150 people. It's 100 degrees in July. This sucks. Yes, it does. But that's very different from a kind of meaningless emptiness that you can
Yes.
have going, right? So what are the difference between those? There is something for me because, again, I'm always, like I told you before, I really think, and I was just speaking about Luke and with Luke and Aspacy about this. There's something about what is prayer that is actually very mysterious and interesting to me. That like many Christians act like they know what it is, but then when you ask it, it's like kind of vague. It's like not clear. But I
Mhm.
think there's something fundamental about prayer that actually Christians getting right or thinking anew is tied to this kind of Christian renaissance that seems to be going on in a certain way.
Mhm.
And I want to say that there is something about prayer that is participating in the energies, that is also about learning the difference between not wanting to get out of bed at 5:30 to unload trucks, because who does want to get out of bed to unload trucks, and yet you need to do it because you want to take care of your family, versus
Mhm.
the I don't want to get out of bed because life is meaningless. There's a difference
Mhm.
between those. And God, which is this? How do I know? Like, looking for that teaching seems to be really important. But I think about that a lot on prayer and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, one of our first conversations was on what even is prayer. So definitely a little full circle there. But yeah, I
Absolutely.
definitely have to start heading out, Daniel.
I'm
I
always good to see you, Tyler.
always love it. That would
Yes,
be
sir.
awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much
your
for your
time,
time,
sir.
Daniel.
Always good to see
Always.
you, sir. God bless. All the
All righty,
best.
brother. Bye bye.